we are going to spend today really helping you break down the steps to successfully obtain an internship in the US. Okay, internships in the United States are very competitive. And of course, figuring out how to acquire an internship abroad may feel quite overwhelming. But the reality is, if you are very organized, proactive, you're planning ahead, you're flexible, and you really understand the resources available to you, and of course, all of the steps required, you can absolutely make it happen for yourself. So we have a lot to cover today. We'll go ahead and jump in. Please do feel free to enter your questions in the chat. I might be able to answer a few along the way, but most questions will be answered at the end of the session. And of course, if you have questions relating to your personal circumstances or eligibility, I'll be sharing contact information at the end of the session today, and you can email us directly. So just to kick us off here, a brief introduction. I am Shana Katz, Vice President and Responsible Officer here at AIFS Professional Pathways. And I've been working with international students and interns coming to the US for about 18 years now, and excited to now oversee the J1 Visa Sponsorship Administration and US Internship Placement Services for international students here at AIFS. A little bit about us. AIFS is one of the largest and longest running cultural exchange organizations globally. We support over 40,000 travelers, mostly students and young professionals who are participating in programming in 30 countries. And these range from academic exchange, educational travel, as well as visa sponsorship. So we are designated by the U.S. Department of State to sponsor J1 visas in 7 categories. A few that you may be familiar with: au pairs, summer camp counselors. These are all under J1 visa categories. Today, we'll be talking a bit about the intern category. We also support teachers and trainees. So that's a little bit about us and why we're here talking to you today. So today we're going to review really the key steps and the timeline that you need to be considering, as well as high-level best practices to successfully acquire an internship in the US. So we'll start from your very first steps, sort of conceptualizing all of this, up to your arrival in the US. First, we'll be talking a bit about best practices for planning and preparing this process to really set you up for success to obtain an internship. We'll then talk through the action items throughout the application process. And then once you receive an offer, what is the timeline and considerations to intern and live abroad, particularly when it comes to immigration and visa acquisition, and really those concerns around ensuring you have a safe and compliant experience in the US. And then finally, I will talk a little bit about AIFS Professional Pathways and how we help students through the internship process in the US. Now, of course, you are here because you see value in interning and living abroad, and that's really wonderful. So these experiences, of course, have tremendous benefits, from introducing you to new perspectives, to your theoretical studies, to boosting your career prospects, to simply personal development. And so these are some of the benefits that we hear from students coming to the US to intern quite often upon concluding their program. Folks are able to really have some clarity on those career prospects. What are the things that they like and frankly don't like in the workplace to help influence sort of next steps after graduation? Having a global experience, students very often say that it helps them become more competitive in the job market after graduation. Students are improving specialized skills, business acumen, of course, improving English for those who English is not your first language, better understanding business culture and relationship building, connecting with mentors, broadening your network. And then, of course, what makes it unique to intern abroad, it's really developing that cultural competency, that skill set to live abroad, to adapt to a business culture in a new country. You're developing a very unique set of problem-solving skills, learning how to become adaptable in a very unique way, skills and flexibility, self-awareness. These are really marketable skills, but also very important life skills that, again, that experience abroad helps with. And then, of course, many students, if your academic program requires either study abroad components or an internship requirement, these opportunities can often fill those requirements for you. Now, at the conclusion of today's session, really the key takeaways are the following. First and foremost, you can intern in the US. You are absolutely eligible to apply. You will and can be considered. And from an immigration and visa work authorization perspective, you are legally able to intern. So many times students become confused because when you apply for positions, the job descriptions will often say US citizens only or visa sponsorship not required or not, excuse me, available. That's okay. Companies simply cannot provide that visa sponsorship. You simply obtain it through a third party designated sponsor. So again, you legally are able to do this, and again, have that equal consideration as other candidates. Another takeaway from today's session, you really want to treat this process like a part-time job. That's very important if you want to have success. You really need to be proactive and organized and really take a series of critical steps to stand out. Apologies for that. You also want to go into this process with confidence. Have pride in and really sell the fact that you're coming in with a global perspective. That is incredibly valuable. You also want to have self-awareness and realistic expectations, and we'll talk about some of those as we move forward. It's also very important early on to consider your logistics. Everything from what does this mean academically? What steps do you need to take with your university? And of course, considering the timeline that we'll be talking about in a moment, and then finances. If you're going to be living abroad, do you have access to the means necessary to do so safely and successfully? Now, as you consider internships in the US, this is generally the timeline that you should consider to ensure as little stress as possible and to ensure that you don't miss deadlines for your most desired opportunities. Depending on your location, your existing network, of course, and approach to finding an internship. So if you're doing it independently or with a placement provider, essentially, if you start now, we're currently in April, you can expect to start an internship in the fall or January of the following year. So this timeline I also want to add mainly applies to students in, say, Europe, South America, some countries in Asia. For those of you in Canada, this process will actually take at least a month less than what you see here for reasons I'll explain later on. And then if you're in Asia, Africa, right now the Caribbean, visa processing is taking a bit longer. So if you can start earlier than this timeline, that's better. The sooner you can start, the less risk of any delays arriving in country. To note, it's also important to remember that while internships can technically start any day of the year, opportunities here often align with the US academic calendar. So that means positions generally start at the end of May, beginning of June, end of August, beginning of September, and then again in January. And then for competitive internships, especially if you're applying independently, they often have application deadlines ranging between 3 and 6 months before the anticipated start date. So you want to keep this in mind, and that's why you see really such a broad timeline here. And now, if you're searching for internships independently, you're going to want to start that process at minimum 6 months in advance of when you plan on arriving in the US. You'll see some added time here, really to incorporate the planning process as well. But again, I would say you want to plan on that 6 month window at minimum. Alternatively, if you opt to work with a placement provider, you're removing some of that significant time commitment involved for networking and again, that application search. So in this scenario, you're really thinking about a process that takes about 4 months. Again, the more time, the better, but at least 4 months to obtain that internship, move through the immigration process, and arrive. You see that there is additional time added here to account for, excuse me, for the independent planning for the process of sort of getting organized and preparing all of your necessary materials. Either scenario, I cannot stress enough, the more time you give yourself, the better. The more prepared you are, the more opportunities that you're going to have in the long run. So let's walk through each of these steps in this time frame. So we're going to get started by looking at the preparatory steps that you should be taking to help ensure that you are organized, intentional, and really ready to successfully and efficiently jump into the internship application process. I will say students will often skip these steps or do them in tandem with the application process. That's absolutely possible, but if you take this little bit of extra time, you will ultimately have, again, a greater success in the application process, less risk of submitting materials that you are less confident in or perhaps are less polished. You'll have a clearer perspective of exactly what you're seeking in a position, and that ends up being reflected throughout the application process. So at this stage, you really want to approach your internship search again with intentionality. You want to be able to confidently articulate your priorities, your goals and experiences, and then quickly and efficiently apply for new opportunities. So you're going to take several steps to do the following. You're going to define your goals. You're going to understand what your priorities are. Again, you're going to have to have some flexibility throughout the process. You want to know what those available resources are that you have to make this possible. You want to understand your needs and, of course, your personal qualities so that you can put yourself forward in the best light and apply for opportunities that you qualify for. You want to make sure that you understand your industry, the companies that you're interested, the job market in general. Different industries have different best practices, so you want to familiarize yourself with that. You're going to, of course, consult your university to ensure that you have all of the required considerations, whether that's to take a leave of absence or obtain credit. You want to make sure that, for example, if you need an internship that is 14 weeks in length to obtain credit, you want to make sure you have that information in advance so that you don't accept an internship that's only 12 weeks in length, right? You're going to assess your financial situation early on, again, to make sure that this opportunity is safe and possible for you. You're going to work on updating all of your credentials into, say, an American style resume and cover letter. And then you're going to update all of your online profiles so that they are professional and up to date. And at this stage, you are going to want to start engaging with your network. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So first, you want to take your time to ask yourself several questions. And I encourage you strongly to write down your responses just for yourself, for you to reference to these questions. We'll share a checklist with these questions later on, so we won't review all of them now. But in sum, you want to make sure that you understand your personal motivation, that you understand your strengths and your priorities, and that you can articulate those to others. In fact, when it comes to your priorities, I strongly encourage you to write them down and number them as sort of your top priority with this upcoming experience, sort of 1 through 10, if you will. So, for example, maybe your top priority doesn't matter the company name, it's about gaining experience with a very specific technology or something, again, very specific related to perhaps your thesis or research. For others, you might be a little more flexible in the type of activities, and your number one priority is to live in New York City or San Francisco. Anyways, write down these priorities. You are going to find that internship opportunities will often not meet all of your personal requirements, But you'll be able to sort of reference these priorities and to assess, again, do these opportunities really meet your needs and expectations? You're also going to take time assessing your personal network. Who do you know that can introduce you to someone in the US market? Do you have been useful LinkedIn connections? Do you have family friends in the US? Are there any international students in your classes that you could ask questions of and who could potentially introduce you to folks? What you will find throughout this process is that it's going to be very important, and I will probably reiterate this multiple times, that you're not simply submitting applications, but that you are leveraging a network. And you're going to have to put a little bit of extra effort in, of course, when you're doing that from abroad. You're also going to think about what you do and don't know about in your industry, both the hiring process and companies. I always say before you begin applying, start researching US-based companies. Don't simply rely on business names that you're familiar with. Maybe you are familiar with a few reputable companies and you really want to apply for internships there. That's great. But I encourage you to start researching and identify 10 or 20 companies you've never heard of before in your industry that you want to learn more about or who may have available internships. Start familiarizing yourself with that now. Furthermore, you want to start thinking about when you identify these companies, why they interest you. Write down one sentence to help you sort of prioritize this list or build upon it. Write down one sentence for each company, why it interests you or why your experience aligns with what they do. That will help again as you prioritize, but also once you start the application process, you can immediately pull from that from this work that you're doing now. And then you're going to consider your logistics, as I mentioned earlier. You really want to understand the requirements and protocols with your university. Again, how do you get credit? How do you take a leave of absence? Does someone need to approve the internship before you accept it? And then, of course, absolutely look at your financial situation. You will, at minimum, have, of course, travel and visa related expenses. And in many cases, you will be responsible for the majority of your living expenses while abroad. In the US, payment to interns is not legally required. So it will vary greatly by industry. You'll have, some of you will be paid by the hour, sort of a standard salary. You see that quite common, very generous salaries, say in tech or finance. Other industries, you may simply have a stipend. It might be $1,000 a month, for example, or stipends to help with local transportation. Or in some industries like the arts, sometimes law, nonprofits, payment is oftentimes, there often is no payment. As you're thinking about all of this, we generally advise budgeting at minimum $2,500 per month that you are in the US, plus probably 2,500 US dollars for travel and immigration expenses. And then, of course, you want to have a small buffer for any medical emergencies that you might have or any unexpected travel once you're here. If you need to go home for an emergency, for an example. So you're going to assess your personal finances, family funds, for example. If you are on a scholarship, research, will that cover your time in the US? Sometimes that can supplement your expenses. Are there additional scholarships available specifically for time abroad or for internships? You want to make sure that you feel comfortable about sustaining yourself in the US. Also, be sure to consider the exchange rate when you are thinking about that financial viability. You really want to be prepared and not be surprised later on or right before you arrive in realizing that, wait a minute, you actually need more funding, for example. So, really be thoughtful about this process before you jump into applying for the internships. Next, you're going to start working on updating your credentials. So that primarily means creating a professional American style resume. You're going to be updating and activating your professional online presence, and then potentially creating templates for US style cover letters. Internships are very competitive here, so you really want to make sure that your materials stand out. that you're really selling yourself in a professional and meaningful way, that your materials are edited and polished and really showcase, again, your journey and your experiences. I highly advise simply searching or Googling American style resume and cover letter templates. There are tons out there for free, so you can simply, capture one that you feel suits your style and plug in your information accordingly. Once complete, please do save those documents as PDFs. Many times when you submit a document or email it, the format can appear differently on someone else's computer. So you want to make sure that, again, that crisp, polished look appears for whomever opens those documents. Of course, some applications will not have you submit an attachment, but you do want to have it ready just in case. Some applications, of course, you're just copying and pasting basically that information into a form. So you're going to have this ready before you start applying. I won't spend too much time on this again because you're going to take a look at some templates on time, but do want to highlight really what you're looking for in an American style resume, right? You have your header, which is just your name, contact information, and if you have any relevant social media handles like LinkedIn, or again, if you have a website for your portfolio. Do not include personal information like marriage status or pictures. That is not standard practice on US style resumes. I strongly encourage a short, what we call a chapeau at the top, which is basically a very short sentence, 1 to 2 sentences that really highlight or summarize your experiences and skills. So, for example, it might read, a creative and collaborative design student, fluent in digital design tools with customer experience, a modern aesthetic, and global perspective, looking to launch a career in brand development. This is something that you can, again, part of your elevator pitch, you can use in many different contexts, but that's just one example. Okay. So we always say a little header. You can also customize that for different applications. You're going to highlight your educational experience. Don't forget if you've studied abroad to note that. You're then going to outline your professional or relevant experiences. If you don't have a lot of work experience, that's okay. In this section, you would just title it relevant experience. You can put, again, any jobs or internships, but also if you were, say, in a leadership role or a member of any committees at your university, perhaps you led a certain type of research project, you can outline all of these things in your professional and relevant experience. And then you'll highlight any relevant skills and languages that you speak. I do want to quickly highlight here when you are presenting your experiences, again, this is all about setting yourself up for success and setting yourself apart from other candidates. So I just want to quickly show an example of what you don't want to do and do want to do on your resumes. So as an example, let's take a look at the second category here. Perhaps you don't have relevant work experience in your industry, but you have been a nanny or a babysitter over summer and vacation months, right? Do not simply write on your resume that you nanny children for a family. The reality is that experience has lended you very valuable skills. So you really want to capture your accomplishments and any, particularly those that that are measurable. You want to also capture, again, think about initiative, leadership, and focus on some very active verbs. So again, we're not saying you just simply nanny children, but you developed and led creative and educational activities to encourage child development. Okay, so again, we have that active verb, we have that leadership. We're able to see that, okay, this individual did develop a skill in this specific area. Managed work hours and payments while self-employed. Okay, so that tells me you actually have money management skills. Okay, so hiring managers, this is a great way to really demonstrate transferable skills, particularly when you don't have a lot of work experience, to highlight your accomplishments. And again, simply with the first words in all of these bullets, as a hiring manager, I have a sense of your skill set. I see here, right? Resolved, processed, coordinated, developed, managed. Even without reading the rest of this sentence, I have a sense as a hiring manager of your skill set. Jobs and internships now are requiring less and less cover letters, but you will often see them required or optional. I always say if optional materials are requested, if you have them on hand, do submit them. Again, it can only strengthen your application. And cover letters are a great way, again, to show any transferable skills, to really express your interest and passion for your field or for this position, and it can demonstrate your strong writing skills. So again, look up templates for this. You're highlighting here, you're not reiterating your whole resume. Here, you're really focusing on concisely why you are interested in this role and the skills that you have to offer and are interested in developing. You're really making the case for yourself in this letter, which is usually about, 3 paragraphs long. Okay. And again, make it professional, save it as a PDF, and send accordingly. You'll now go ahead and take steps to improve and leverage your social media professionally. So, depending on your industry, this may be LinkedIn, it may be Instagram or other platforms. Regardless, you want a professional feel, you want the content to be updated. For example, LinkedIn, if you're updating your resume, go ahead and update your LinkedIn as well. You really want to showcase your experiences. And then you really need to begin engaging with your industry through these online communities. As I said previously, it is very difficult to obtain an internship simply by submitting online application after online application. You really need to have personal touch points and interactions with contacts at the companies you're interested in. Again, building those relationships and making sure people start to become familiar with your name. So before you start applying for internships, start making those connections. Again, since you're thinking about this from abroad, those are primarily going to be online, and you're going to start engaging meaningfully. Send them messages, ask questions, simply share that you're interested in their work. Look for online events that the company, individuals at companies you're interested are on panels or are hosting. If you attend those virtual events, that provides an inroad with several contacts that you can then message to say, oh, I attended this event that you spoke at. I was very interested in to learn about XYZ. Thank you for that. Again, that provides you an entry point. You want to make connections now so that when you start applying for internships, you can then reach out to those individuals again. And at that point, it will be your second or third touch point with them. So your name is already familiar. They'll be more likely to help you in the process, reach out to perhaps someone in human resources for you, or to simply provide you with some guidance. So again, at this stage, and this really bleeds into your groundwork stage. So again, this is really your 6 to 8 months out for your internship, and you're going to continue doing this throughout the application process. You're doing that research about companies, you're vamping up LinkedIn or other online profiles, you're attending these events, you're building up this personal network, and you're leveraging the network. This is not a time to be shy. It is time to put yourself out there, to be assertive, engage, connect, and then nurture the important relationships. Also, sending follow-up communication if you ever get a response from any of these individuals. Again, you want multiple touch points. You need to start building a network within your industry here in the United States for success. And even if not now, these individuals could certainly be a beneficial network to you in the future. Okay, so let's get into the internship search and application process. So some students will, as mentioned previously, will utilize an internship placement service. So some of this, of course, will look quite different for those individuals. But we find that most students do find opportunities on their own. So it's important to remember that Again, the process is competitive. It is often time-bound. So for success, you really want to be doing more than simply sending out your resume on online platforms. So again, part of that is the networking that we talked about. But let's take a look at what that holistic experience looks like. So as you're going through the search process, first a few practical considerations. First and foremost, create a tracking system for yourself. Maybe that's an app on your phone, maybe it's an Excel spreadsheet, but you want to track the companies you're interested in. If you can find any personal contact information at those companies, human resources, certain individuals doing work you're interested in at that company, track who you know there, whose contact information you have. And then, of course, if you apply for a position, note the date that you applied. You'll want to know that for subsequent follow-up. You're going to search both through online platforms and directly on company sites. We talked about conducting company research earlier. You're going to bookmark those sites and reference those pages for opportunities. You're also, of course, going to be contacting individuals, right, throughout this networking process. Particularly small companies many times don't post positions. Sometimes it just takes that personal inquiry that the company will let you know, sure, we would be able to accommodate you for an internship during your desired time. You're, of course, going to identify positions of interest. First thing you're going to do when you look at a position, review the deadlines, make sure that you still have time to apply, you haven't missed a deadline, or that you know when the deadline is so that you don't miss it in the future. You're also going to look at the application requirements and follow instructions. So if they say they're going to require a resume and a cover letter and 2 references, you want to make sure you have all of that ready. Do not simply submit a resume, right? So make sure you understand the requirements. Also take a look at the qualifications. Make sure that it is a good fit. And again, you just want to go into those prepared so you can apply in the timely fashion that is required and by following the instructions. You also want to make sure that the company and the position meet visa program requirements, and we'll talk about those shortly. So that is an added step for you as an international intern. As noted previously, do not discount positions that state that they are only for U.S. citizens or that they do not provide visa sponsorship. Again, we'll talk about that more in a moment. And then, of course, continue networking and pursuing that personal network and personal outreach. So again, this search process is really happening now between months 6 and 4, maybe 3, but really plan for months 6, 5, and 4 before your desired start date. Okay, again, a lot of internships will have deadlines that are 3 to 6 months out. So again, first you're going to utilize reputable and regularly updated platforms. You see a series of examples here, and these really apply to all industries. Some industries do have industry-specific platforms, so you'll want to take a look, but these are generally the reliable resources that interns use here. ZipRecruiter, Indeed, Idealist. That's really great for nonprofits, schools, international fields. Intern Match, Career Builder, etc. Again, you're also going to be looking at company websites. You'll often see tabs for employment, join us, get involved, work with us. Monitor those websites as well. Bookmark, and you can take a look at them every week to see if they update new positions. So with these, of course, your action items, you're continuously conducting research. If the company has a mailing list, go ahead and join it. For all of these platforms, you're going to create an updated profile, and many of them also have alerts, so you can get either daily or weekly alerts when new positions become available. So make sure, again, early on you are taking those steps. Also make sure some students will already have these profiles set up and forget to update their resume. So, right, we've done all that legwork for updating credentials. Make sure all of these platforms reflect that. Okay. So you're finding opportunities of interest. You're going to submit your application. If you can, Say you see a position on one of the general platforms, take a look on the company website if the internship is posted there as well. If you can apply directly on the website, I generally encourage it. It's less likely to get sort of lost in the shuffle of the bigger platforms. If not, that's fine. You apply directly on the platform where you found it. Again, you're submitting that polished material. If you can customize it, do that. You're going to follow those instructions and submit those optional materials, which we've already discussed. As noted, you've already done that research, right? You have that tracking spreadsheet or information in your phone. Those individual contacts that you've identified, after you apply, you want to send them an email or a message, just simply and very professionally letting them know that you've applied for an internship at their company or reiterating your interest in the position. If you can attach your resume, thank them in advance for their consideration, sending that extra note. Again, you want people to be familiar with your name. And you're going to let your network know. You're going to share your resume. Again, maybe it's a family friend that lives in the US or that is working in your field. Let them know that you're applying for internships and make sure they have your credentials as well. Again, you're tracking when you apply for these positions. If you have that direct contact information, every 1 to 2 weeks, you want to go ahead and send a follow-up email. Again, very professionally formatted. You're going to express your continued interest in the role and your availability for an interview at any time. And of course, willingness to supply any supplemental materials like references or answer any additional questions. And we've already talked about that continuous social media engagement with the company if you are able. I will say in the process, be patient. You are going to have to apply to many positions before you move along to the next step, especially when you don't have a built-in network. So do plan, again, don't get frustrated with this. Do plan that you will be applying for anywhere from 10 to 50 positions. Okay, I usually say, usually every 10 to 15 positions, you will get an offer for an interview. And you may need to go through a few interview processes before you get an offer. So once you get that offer for an interview, it's so important to be prepared. As a hiring manager, I cannot tell you, again, especially when you're interviewing multiple candidates, someone can have really wonderful materials, but if they come to an interview ill-prepared, that is, of course, a deal breaker. So being very prepared and professional will really set you apart from other candidates. You're going to practice in advance. You're going to be familiar with the company. We already talked about early on preparing that elevator pitch about yourself, your goals, your skills. Again, that's very concise. You're going to have that ready. Go to every interview with examples. So, for example, if a hiring manager asks for what are your strengths? You don't simply want to say, oh, I have strong coding skills, or I'm a great leader. You always want to follow that up with, for example, and give a very specific example of how you demonstrate those skills, a very specific example of an accomplishment that you are proud of. Or maybe you even have skills that sort of are in progress of developing, and you can give an example of how a skill set has improved with time. So again, come prepared with those. Also, come prepared with questions. At the end of every interview, interviewers will ask, do you have any questions for us? Do not say no. Even if you ask generic questions, things like, how is success measured here? Ask a personal question. What do you enjoy about working for this company? Can you tell me how interns are mentored at this company? Of course, any other specific questions you have about the projects or positions are great too, but always come with a few questions. And of course, during this session, even if it's a virtual or phone interview, you want to present yourself professionally. As much as you can smile, smile. When you speak and smile at the same time, that does convey something very different than if you are sort of frowning or looking down and sort of demonstrating anxious energy, if you will. And then, of course, after you have an interview, you always want to send a follow-up email. If you do not have the direct email of your interviewer, whoever contacted you for the interview or human resources, you can send the email to that contact. thanking them for their time and consideration, and again, reiterating any key points you want them to walk away with from the interview with. So we always get this question of, okay, well, the job posting said that they won't sponsor visas or US citizens only. That is okay. The question is how to deal with that. So you can do this in a few ways. So as previously noted, companies cannot sponsor intern visas. Again, this requires a certified party to do so. So you want to make clear with your employer that you do not need sponsorship. You're going to tell them that you have an available J1, you have J1 intern visa sponsorship available to you. However, the company will need to commit about 1 to 2 hours in the internship, in the immigration process. So they do need to be willing to do that. Some companies may not be willing to do that, but most are if they know, again, sort of the details around that and understand that they are not responsible for the visa sponsorship itself. So you can raise this in a few different places. One, in a cover letter, if you're providing that, or if there's a comment section of an application form, you can simply make a note. I have J1 intern visa sponsorship ready, which provides me the ability to intern full-time with legal work authorization. Something as simple as that. You can also ask in that period of time in your interview, do you have any questions? You can raise the subject at that time as well, and then ask, is this something that the company would be willing to support? We would require them to provide basic information about the position and company, and you'll just confirm with them that they're okay with doing that. When you're emailing company contacts, either early on, the recruiter, human resources, after you have submitted your application, or in advance or after your interview, again, those emails provide a great opportunity for you to highlight your strengths and your interests, but it can also provide you the opportunity to state, while I am based outside of the US or while I'm a non-US citizen, I do not require your visa sponsorship. I have a J1 intern visa sponsor. Again, reiterating, who will simply need to receive basic information about the internship position from you once offered. You can even tell them if you have questions about this process or the sponsorship, I'm happy to put you in touch with my sponsor. So it's okay for you to say this early on, but you will want to make it clear at some point during the application process so that they are not surprised later on. Now let's talk about that immigration piece a little bit more. Okay, so now you've gone through the preparatory stage, you have gone through the rigorous application process, you've had your interviews, and you've received an offer. Okay, the next phase you move into, and this is really months 3 and 2, prior to your sponsorship, excuse me, prior to your internship start date, you move into your sort of visa and immigration phase. Okay, so these are the steps that you will need to take. First off, to make clear, in order to legally intern in the US, you do require a J1 intern visa. If a company tells you that a B visa is fine, that's a business or tourist visa, you're only going to be here for 3 months. No, that is not legally the way you pursue an internship. You need a J1 intern visa. Okay. Little bit of information about this visa category. It is a non-immigrant temporary cultural exchange visa. It's not technically considered a work visa. This is a part of a much bigger U.S. Department of State program called Bridge USA, and it's really intended to allow for learning, collaboration, primarily through educational, professional, and cultural exchange opportunities. So as I mentioned earlier, there's actually many different categories of the J1 visa to allow for these things. Again, you will be pursuing a J1 intern visa. Now, this visa allows you to work full-time in your internship with legal U.S. work authorization anywhere from 3 weeks up to 12 months in duration. And as previously discussed, you will work with a designated sponsor to provide you with that visa sponsorship that is not coming from your company or employer. So it's important to note how you qualify for the J1 visa. So have this information before you start applying to make sure you are eligible, as well as your company or employer and potential position. So how do you qualify for the J intern visa? First of all, you need to be a full-time enrolled student in a post-secondary degree program outside of the US and have completed at least one semester of your studies. So you will be submitting information to a visa sponsor. You will be proving this by providing a copy of your transcript and proof of full-time enrollment. Alternatively, you still qualify for the intern visa up to 12 months after graduation. So you can do these professional opportunities not simply as a student for credit, but again, as sort of that first step post-graduation. So for this, during the application process, you would be asked to provide confirmation that you've completed your degree program or a copy of your diploma. You also must be at least 18 years of age. There is no age maximum, and you are a non-US citizen. So for this, you're providing proof to the sponsor with a copy of a valid passport. You must be proficient in English, proficient enough to be successful in a US English-speaking workplace. And you'll be asked to provide proof of this in a sponsorship application process, either showing proof that you're studying at an English-speaking university, perhaps you are a citizen and attend school in Canada, right? If you have English test scores. If you don't have these things, no problem. You will just have a short interview with the sponsor who will confirm your proficiency. We also need to ensure that you do not have what's called immigrant intent, so that you have an intention to return home after your program in order to apply your learnings to either your academic study or your future career pursuits. And then, of course, we want to know that you are able to financially sustain yourself. So when you submit information to a sponsor, you're going to complete an application form where basically you're confirming all of this information. You're providing those documents I previously mentioned. You'll provide a copy of your resume, and then potentially have an interview with the sponsor, or you'll be asked about what interviews you had with your host company, future employer. So even though you will be the J-1 visa holder, your company, per federal regulation, your host company or employer, and the position itself also must meet a series of requirements. So essentially, your company, we need to ensure that it is a bona fide established business with full-time US-based employees on site. Again, this is a cultural immersion program, so you need to have a physical location where you are working at minimum 60% of the time. So some remote is okay, but you do need to be on site at least 60% of the time with multiple US-based employees, again, for that immersive experience. So this is mainly what we're evaluating with the company. Also, companies need to abide by all federal wage and labor laws. We need to ensure that they are responsible, again, an established and business entity. They also need to have the resources, time, and mentoring capacity to provide you with a full-time skilled opportunity that includes clear learning objectives. You'll have must have a supervisor on site. If they also need to be complying, as I mentioned, wage laws, that they are essentially paying you the industry standard. Again, in some cases that is unpaid and that is okay, but there may be some wage requirements depending on the industry. The company also needs to agree to a couple of things. One, I mentioned previously, providing the sponsor with basic information about their company and the position. They also will need to be willing to complete a couple of brief surveys, or excuse me, they first will need to do some type of onboarding. Again, usually that's about a 30-minute call with your sponsor who will be vetting them throughout the process. So they're agreeing to the application process, possibly a call with the sponsor, and then while you are here in the US, they're agreeing to complete one or two short surveys, basically monitoring surveys that will be sent out by your sponsor. Now, your position, this needs to be related to your field of study. So if you're studying hospitality management, your internship should be somehow related to the field of hospitality, right? You could also be a business management student and have an internship in, say, a hotel, but your activities are related to business management, okay? So we need to have that clear linkage with the position. The position must be full-time, at least 32 hours per week. As noted, it must be at least 60% on site. So it could be a hybrid or fully in person, but it cannot be a fully remote position. This position is not intended for you to simply file paperwork or get a supervisor coffee. These positions have to provide robust learning opportunities, engagement with hands-on and sort of live projects, if you will, within the company. In fact, your clerical activities cannot exceed more than 20% of the time. So you want to make sure you're aware of all these things when you're reviewing the positions. And then, of course, the sponsor will also review position details to help ensure these things before visa sponsorship is extended. You should also, again, have that full-time, have a supervisor on site, and there should be mechanisms for evaluation of your performance in these positions. There also need to be clear opportunities for cultural immersion. Again, learning new skills on site. These are very important components to the program. Most positions in most industries are eligible for the J1, so that, which is good news for you. However, there are a couple of limitations, okay? If you are in the field of aviation, you cannot apply for a J, you're not eligible for the J. And any positions that involve the care of patients or animals, care or contact of patients or animals, uh, those positions also are not eligible for the J1. So if you are a nursing student, you cannot have, or a medical student, you cannot have any patient-facing positions. You could, however, have a position based in a lab, say lab research, or in clinical operations, again, so long as you don't have that engagement. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind. For those of you in the hospitality industry, no activities like housekeeping or fast casual restaurants. Again, this is really about advancing professional skills, and we can't risk any sort of labor, you pursuing opportunities that are based in labor activities. So when you apply for visa sponsorship, so again, this is about 2 to 3 months out from your anticipated start date. You've identified your sponsor, both you and your employer, or host company as we call it, submit the required information. That is then evaluated, various interviews are completed, and then your sponsor will issue two key federal documents, the DS-7002, which is basically a glorified job description, and your DS-2019 Certificate of Eligibility, which is your official document that states this individual has work authorization and has a visa, is sponsored for their J1 visa. Canadians in the room, you're done. You can travel tomorrow once you have these documents. For non-Canadians, and this is why, by the way, Canadians I mentioned earlier, your processing time is a bit shorter when we looked at that timeline because you can now travel. Non-Canadians, however, you will then proceed with completing a short application form through the U.S. government website to book a visa appointment at the U.S. consulate. Wait times for those appointments will vary greatly depending on city and time of year, but plan for anywhere from 2 days to 6 weeks. Okay? And then once you attend that appointment, the consulate then moves your case into another phase, which takes approximately 2 weeks, and that's an online and social media vetting stage. So when you attend your appointment, you're going to make sure all of your social media accounts are set to public. Again, you move into that final vetting stage, and then the consulate issues your visa, and you are ready to travel. It's important to note a great aspect of the J1 intern visa. So all of your documents are going to list explicitly your internship start and end date. On the J1 visa, you can then enter the United States up to 30 days before your internship start date. So again, depending on when you started this process, if you want to have those days to help you settle in, to travel around the US, you're going to want to account for that in your planning process. You can also depart the US up to 30 days after your internship end date. So just keep that in mind. Also, a couple of additional items to note under the J1. Once you arrive, you will then validate your visa. So you're basically telling your sponsor you are where you're supposed to be. And you can then apply for a social security number, and that you can have for the rest of your life. You're going to be following all of those documents. You're going to maintain communication with your sponsor. You're going to continue to intern full time. One thing to note, particularly for those who have low or unpaid internships, legally you cannot be employed anywhere else other than your approved host company or internship employer. So again, if you are unpaid, if this is an unpaid internship, you cannot participate in other work to help supplement your income that is not legal. So just keep that in mind again as we're talking about financial planning. Okay. So with that, we are close to time here. To conclude here, I want to talk a little bit about AFS professional pathways and how we can help in your internship search, okay, or your internship sponsorship process. So here at AFS Professional Pathways, we specifically support international students and young professionals who are interested in pursuing, again, internships and professional training immersion in the US across virtually all industries and with businesses across the United States. So we're working day in and day out with folks like you, with employers, many times immigration attorneys, universities, and professionals at all levels to ensure everyone is compliant and having healthy, safe, and successful learning opportunities here in the US. As noted previously, we are designated by the US State Department to serve as a J-1 intern visa sponsor. So we are essentially experts in that area. We're providing immigration compliance, expertise, and advisement. We're also supporting webinars like this with internship search advisement. If you would like additional help, so maybe you are too overwhelmed with the application process, internship application process, or you would just feel more comfortable with some additional guidance, we do provide internship placement services. We're making sure, regardless if we've helped you or you found your own internship, we're making sure that these are robust educational opportunities. And then we're monitoring and supporting you while you are in country, again, to ensure that you are safe, compliant, and that you're having an enriching opportunity here in the United States. So this notates all of the industries that we work with. So if you are studying in these areas, we can sponsor your J-1 visa for your internship here in the States. For those that you see in asterisks, hospitality, media, business, law, computer science, architecture, arts and culture, these are the areas in which we can support internship placements. So if you are interested in internship placements, we are basically using our experience and our existing company network and our team to explore new networks to match you with available, safe, and compliant educational internship opportunities. So, sort of the services that you receive, we provide you with initial resume review and advisements. We'll give you tips on how to improve the resume. We'll talk through, ways of sort of selling yourself in these materials. We will then take your credentials and present them to, again, a vast network of pre-vetted companies we've already vetted and worked with, as well as new companies that we will first vet to find those internship opportunities for you. We're going to review those opportunities to ensure that they're full-time, that they're educational, that they provide that hands-on opportunity. Again, we're making sure that these are not solely clerical activities that you're coming to the US for. And we're making sure that if you have requirements with your university, that these positions meet all of those requirements. We will then coordinate the companies that have available opportunities. We will coordinate interviews between the two of you. We want to make sure that you feel comfortable with the company as well as, them having that FaceTime with you to ensure that they too feel comfortable with proceeding. And then we ensure, and I will add, we will work with you with mock interviews in advance of that. And then we will help secure a position for you. Of note, this service is available to all current post-secondary students. Most of our placements are in the New York City and New York tri-state area, but if you are interested in other locations, we are happy to, again, reach out to our networks in those areas. And most placements are with small and mid-sized companies. Most large companies have their own recruitment strategies and very distinct processes that they would require you to go through their formal process. So placements are generally, again, with small and mid-sized companies. And frankly, that works out very well because that provides you a real holistic experience with a company. So you can really see projects through start to finish. You can see the various aspects of the operations of the business and so on. As mentioned previously, compensation with placements is rare. and really only available with specific fields. So for example, in tech, again, payment is standard protocol. But if you're moving forward with a placement, internship placement service, you generally, again, when you're doing that planning, do not plan to receive compensation. But again, we'll be in communication with you about that. And again, this process, if you are using, say, professional pathways, you really want to start the placement process 4 to 6 months in advance. 4 is fine, but again, the earlier you start, the more opportunities you will have. And then whether you've found an internship on your own or you're utilizing our placement services, we then provide that certified visa sponsorship support. So we're evaluating you, your position and host for eligibility, issuing those federal documents, maintaining your government records. You're also receiving pre-arrival orientation and resources to help with your acclimation to living in the United States, understanding your employee rights, available housing resources, best practices for finding safe housing in the US, things like this. Once you are in country, as mentioned previously, we're providing in-country support and guidance. We're monitoring to ensure your well-being and continued compliance. We are available 24/7 to you in case of emergencies. We're also enrolling you in U.S. health insurance and help support you should you need to utilize that while you're here. The U.S. health system is quite complicated, so we want to make sure that you're able to approach that successfully. We're also here, should you have a negative experience in the workplace, we're here to serve as your advocate and mediate any situations. Or again, if there's an unsafe situation, remove you from that situation and place you somewhere else. Again, we are monitoring through program evaluations. We'll also provide you with any tips on taxes at the end of the year. And in major cities like New York, we will provide opportunities for interns to come together for fun cultural activities. Lastly here, what does that process look like? So whether you are pursuing placements or sponsorship, you essentially will create an account in an online portal. You're going to submit a basic application form about your background, your academics, prior US visas, these types of things. You're then going to be asked to provide a series of supplemental documents, which we discussed earlier, the resume, proof of English, passport, etc. And then if you found your own internship, your company, host company, is also completing an online form. Once both pieces are received, we start the evaluation process. Step 4. If you are seeking internship placements, this is when that placement process begins. When we start having meetings with you about your goals, reviewing your resume, reaching out to our networks, and providing that match experience. We then at that time gather information from your company to complete the required federal forms. Step 5 and 6, we are then issuing all of the federal documents you are required to obtain. And that is when, again, you pursue obtaining your visa at the U.S. consulate. So again, this process, if you're looking for placements, the placement process usually takes around 6 weeks. Again, the more time, the better. And then the visa sponsorship piece takes about 4 weeks. So you're going to want to account for that in your planning process as well.